Hello and welcome to Cortina, your car brochure channel, and in today's episode for Ford Friday we're going to be looking at the early Ford Sierra. Hello and welcome back, and if you're new to the channel, Cortina, it's a car brochure channel looking at car brochures from around the world for the 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s and sometimes beyond that. So if you're interested in cars, car knowledge and of course car brochures, please consider subscribing. It is completely free and helps both you and the channel. Anyway, back to today's episode, which was first aired on a Friday, and we call those episodes Ford Friday episodes. Every Friday we look at a Ford, other makes and models shown during the week of course. Now today we're going to be looking at the Ford Sierra. What a huge change that was, because this is a very early brochure from 1982. So let's have a look at that one now. So here is today's brochure for the new Ford Sierra, man and machine in perfect harmony. No image of the car on the front cover at all. You know, it was a big shock. Open the cover up and there is a new car. And it certainly was a shock when you look at the Cortina. Now this particular brochure is dated October 1982 and sales for the Sierra started on the 15th of October 82. So like the first real brochure for the Sierra. Now we'll probably refer to this a few times. I've also got the Cortina brochure for 82. So this is an August 82 Cortina. So the end of the Cortina, the beginning of the Sierra. It was a huge change indeed. And certainly the more conservative buyers for the Cortina, I think they were certainly put off a bit by the Sierra because it was such a wild change. Now for me personally, as a child of 9 years old, I much preferred the Sierra. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. But then again, we weren't a Cortina owner in the 70s, and certainly I didn't personally drive, obviously, a Cortina in the 70s. But if you was an owner and a driver of a Cortina, or indeed even if you had a Cortina in your family, I can certainly see how you would have been put off with the new car. Indeed, I mean, our family car when the Sierra came out was the Morris Oxford, so certainly we were kind of like missed the Cortina generation entirely, really. So you can imagine the Sierra to a young child's eyes was quite an amazing looking thing, and I thought it was absolutely fantastic. But anyway, we'll open the brochures up. We'll start obviously looking at the Sierra, how it was introduced, what spec levels came out when it was introduced. There's also a price list in here as well, and a price list in here, so we can kind of like compare how the new vehicle was priced, comparing it to the Cortina. But anyway, without further ado, let's open this Ford Sierra brochure up. Now, as we're greeted on the first page, we get a lovely big image of this new car, and probably the most shocking really of the designs, the gear had a little bit of a different light treatment, and this sort of like blanked area here where you would expect your grille to be. So certainly a huge change on the front end to what was the Ford Cortina, of course. Nice that they show the gear at the top, but obviously most people didn't buy the gear. So let's have a look, see what else we can see in this brochure. So as we turn the page again, it's talking about Ford put the driver first, and indeed there's this little drawing of the driver being in what it's kind of like describing as the perfect driving position, I guess. And at the bottom here it says, the new Ford Sierra, if you love the open road, is a car you're going to enjoy because it's designed around the driver. And indeed those observant will know it's kind of like talking about World Rally Championships, as Ford usually does, but not really much relation to the car itself. But you will notice there is a dealer stamp up here, so let's have a look at that. So the dealer stamp today is Poyser and Rutherford Ford Sales and Service in Loughborough. Not one I know of, but if you do know it or know if it still exists, just jot that in the comments. Always interesting to know. Anyway, let's move further on. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on these sort of introduction pages, but they're really introducing the car because this is a brand new car in this brand new brochure. So certainly a huge shift away from the Cortina, and they're kind of like introducing that in the brochure itself. Now, this is obviously the top of the range model it's trying to show you here. You know, like I say, most people wouldn't have got the top of the range, but obviously this is like the showcase car. But let's just zoom in on that interior a little bit. Now, like I say, this is the model with all the bits and pieces. Most people would have got blanking places in most of these places on your Sierra, but like I said, this is your top of the range gear. But the Sierra in general, I always liked the dash layout, I must admit, and I thought it was a very pleasant move away from the Cortina's quite aging interior, and I'll show you that. Now, if you had a Cortina, really the Sierra was quite familiar, that the layout was very similar actually, but certainly by this time I think the Cortina interior was looking very dated, and I'm sure even Cortina owners would know that the interior of the Sierra was a move on to what is a much more pleasant, more modern interior design. Anyway, let's move on further. Now, the brochure itself goes on for quite some time on this introduction and, you know, showing you aerodynamics, because obviously it's a more aerodynamic shape than the Cortina. But we've moved on to the range proper, so we actually see how this range was introduced. It starts off with this model, the not even an L, so your base model Sierra. They just call it the Sierra Saloon, which I always thought was a bit weird because it's a hatchback, but nevertheless, the very base model Sierra, at a time when Ford, if you bought a base model, you really knew you got the base model. They didn't hide that fact at all. But we'll start with the introduction, then we'll have a look at some of these images for this base model. So it starts by telling us, although this is the least expensive Sierra, it is still remarkably well equipped, a driver's car through and through. It's available with either a 1.3, so a reminder that these Sierras came with a 1.3, so a 1.3 OHC or a 1.6 OHC engine, which give it a very lively performance. Alternatively, you could order the diesel engine. The 5-speed gearbox is optional on the 1.6 litre model, so 4-speed gearbox was probably what you were going to have with this base model Sierra at a time when you'd think they'd all would have moved on to 5-speed gearboxes. A bit of a move on from the Cortina, but Cortina owners would have been used to a 4-speed gearbox, I guess. From outside, you'll recognise it by the special wheels and different grille and bumper treatment. The whole nose section is dark grey. So it's interesting how they kind of like making this base model sound special, and it is today, but back then, you know, saying it's got special wheels, it's, you know, there's nothing special about the wheels at all. They're very basic. The different grille and bumper treatments, the whole nose section is dark grey. I think most people would have been put off by the fact that they didn't paint that nose section. Now today I find these very fascinating. I don't think of them as being very special and collectible today, but back when it was launched, I'm sure nobody saw this and thought that's a very special Sierra. It goes on to tell us, while inside you'll find fully reclining front seats, generous storage bins and built-in armrests on the front doors, and the back seat folds flat in one piece. Telling us that's really amazing. Oh, the back seat folds, but you know, it isn't a split fold, is it? It's just folding in one piece. Now it tells us the model shown is a Sierra 5-door saloon in cardinal red, and we'll have a look at this in a moment. Option fitted at extra cost A-frame head restraints. So unusually someone's spec'd this base model with head restraints, but it didn't even come with head restraints even in 1982. It goes on to tell us those engine choices, 1.3, 1.6 or a 2.3 litre diesel. It tells us it's rear wheel drive. Now I think that's one key point about these new Sierras, like the Cortina. They stuck with that rear wheel drive layout, where I think people were more looking at front wheel drive at this time, but I think they kept it there to be, without going too out of there. I think they've shocked people enough with the design. They didn't want to shock people by saying your Cortina is now a front wheel drive vehicle, so they kept that rear wheel drive layout. 5-speed manual gearbox for the 2.3 litre diesel engine though, and then it goes on to say automatic and 5-speed manual gearbox optional as extra cost on the 1.3. So if you got the 1.6, if you got the 1.3, you had no choice. It only came with the 4-speed. Now, I'm not going to read all the specifications on here, but certainly you can pause it and read it all if you want. It's quite detailed, and unusually it goes into so much detail with the specifications on each model like this. Brakes, we're using a disc drum setup. It gives a little bit of information about these small wheels and tyres, lighting and electrical. The body, hatchback 4-door, so I think that's another change as well. They didn't offer a saloon, as in a vehicle with a boot or a trunk at this time, which I guess I kind of feel that was a bit of a slip up. We had to wait quite some time before we got that with the Sierra, and obviously people were used to that with the Cortina. Though personally I think the hatchback is a better vehicle because it's way more practical. It continues talking a little bit about that information about the body, moves on to the interior. And like I said, I'm not going to talk through all of this because the brochure review will be too long, but a lot of information really on each page. But we're kind of introducing this model, and I think Ford are really going out the way to introduce these cars. And we move on. Like I said, pause the screen if you do want to read it all, but we'll move on still further. And that will end with your full specification list for this base model car. Now let's move on to these interesting images. First image we get is of the rear of this new Sierra. Obviously not much badging on there because it is a base model, so it just says Ford Sierra. We also notice there's no rear wash wipe. No sort of mouldings down the side, as in rubbing strips to stop your vehicle getting hit in the supermarket car park. We've got black fuel cap there rather than a colour coded fuel cap, so really stripped down, and what they call these special wheels is just steel wheels with a little bit of a cap in the centre, so as cheap as they could possibly do it. In fact, there is another image of those wheels, so I would certainly struggle to call these special wheels. We do get a look on the inside, and when we do look on the inside we realise how basic this particular model is. I mean, we don't even get a clock or anything, we just get this like large section here. Big blanking plate where your radio would be. I mean, even a blanking plate where your cigar lighter plug-in would be there. So super basic. They've kind of like stripped it out as much as they possibly could, really. I mean, there's pretty much nothing at all in this section, is there, where you would expect various bits and pieces. All you've really left with is your fan speed and these vents. So I think they stripped it out as much as they possibly could to save every pence, really. And that's certainly the most distinctive angle for these base models. You couldn't really miss it as being a base model with that big unpainted front end on it. Unmistakable. It's kind of like makes it out to be a bit of a thing in the brochure in these early days, but I'm sure Ford was saying you've got a base model, try hard. And I think most people buying a brand new Sierra at this time would at least try to get to the L model, so it kind of like fitted in a little bit better with the range. I would imagine most of these would have gone as fleet vehicles, and of course the private buyers would more likely buy these cars as probably a second-hand vehicle that was particularly cheap, because who would want it? But looking back now, I do find these base model Sierras very fascinating cars. I wonder how many of these base models are still around today. I can't imagine they were really loved in their day, but certainly a bit collectible today for sure. And like it says, this has got the optional extra head restraints, because you wouldn't have even got those on this base model. Now, doing extremely stripped down base models for Ford is really nothing new, and at the end of the Cortina run, 1982 brochure again, they were still throwing this out, the Cortina Saloon, not even an L. But I don't think it stands out as being so basic as that black front end on the Sierra. Now, Ford made the base model stand out with more subtle things, I think, sort of like a black bumper instead of any bright work, and removing the bright work from around the windows, etc., to make this the base model. And again, no head restraints, but I think the base model Sierra certainly stood out more for me. So moving up the Sierra range, the next model in the range was the L. Certainly more popular. You saw lots of Sierra Ls. Didn't really see many base model Sierras, to be honest with you. A sea of L models, and I'm sure even fleet models were more likely to be an L rather than that very base model. I actually thought the L was an attractive looking car when it was launched. Now, we'll have a look at some of the text before we move back to these images. It tells us with the L, Sierra moves a step up the ladder. You can order it with the 1.3, still a 4-speed though, and the 1.6, again, still a 4-speed, but you could have a 5-speed or auto at extra cost, or the 2.3 litre diesel. So the engine setup was the same as that base model. The grille is the same colour as the body. There we go. You won't think that would be a step up thing to have, but yes, we now get a painted grille. Seems a weird thing, doesn't it? And you kind of like think Ford really went out the way to distinguish a base model to maybe try and move you up the range, but still have that base price to say the Sierra starts at. I think that was really the main intention with trying to strip these base models down. The bumpers remain grey with bright inserts, but a body side moulding is added to accentuate the car's low, sleek lines. The L also comes with aerodynamic wheel covers, and the lock-in fuel filler cap matches the body colour. Other standard equipment includes a radio and a clock, so a reminder again that base model didn't even have that. The upholstery is Bristol Sandford cloth. There are cloth inserts in the door panels, and the front seats have fully adjustable head restraints. So again, a safety feature there as standard, but they are a little bit of a different head restraint actually, and we'll look at that in a moment. But perhaps the biggest difference between the interior of the saloon and the L is the L gets a 60-40 split folding back seats, which make it the more versatile, much more versatile as a load carrier. Now when we move to the images, we're going to be looking at an L 5-door. Glacier blue is the colour this time. It does have some options, so options fitted at extra cost are that metallic paint and Econo lights, which hopefully it'll show an image of that as well. So again, it's showing the specifications. It's not as wordy now, it's really just telling us what's up above that model, and showing wheels and tyres being different with those vented wheel covers, which are very sort of memorable as these first Sierras. So it's telling us as this Sierra Saloon, but with body coloured fuel tank locking cap, body coloured free vent front grille, 2-speed windscreen wipers with intermittent wipe, driver and passenger door mirror, so kind of implying there's only a driver's door mirror on the base model, body side protective mouldings with bright insert, radio aerial and additional sound insulation, which more than saying, oh, this is nice that this has got a really more of a reminder how base the base model really was for the Sierra. It goes on to tell us about the interior. I'm not going to read all this out, but it says as the Sierra Saloon, but with Bristol Sandford fabric trim, reclining front seats and seat valances, and adjustable head restraints. So like I say, you got those head restraints as standard. And then you got other things like a load compartment with covered wheel arches and lamps, or not even covered on the base model, vanity mirror on passenger sun visor, centre fascia with ashtray, illuminated cigar lighter, illuminated 3-speed ventilation booster fan. We've got the Ford P21 push button radio, a clock, windscreen wipers have got an intermittent white facility, moulded door trims including integral armrests, door pulls, front door bins, rear door ashtrays, Bristol fabric inserts, upper door panels. So again, really this serves as an example of how the base model really was. Anyway, let's move on to the images of the L. There is our main image, and I think it really looks nice in this glacier blue. It is an attractive colour. A reminder that the mirrors were very weird on these early Sierras as well, but much nicer, isn't it, with the grille colour coordinated. And we've got, like I say, very reminiscent of the Sierra, these quite unique looking wheel trims and colour coordinated fuel caps, etc., to make it certainly look more of an actual car that you would be proud to own. A peep into the interior shows some of those blanking plugs have now been replaced with something, so rather than this area being just nothing there, we have at least got a clock in this section now, rather than this whole section being blank. We've at least got a radio. It's a pretty basic radio, but at least we've got one, and of course that cigar lighter is actually there now, so certainly a move on to a nicer place to be. I think overall a much nicer interior. I mean, it's the simple things, isn't it? Just having a little bit of fabric on these doors rather than just a sea of grey plastic makes it a nicer place to be, I think. And then the final image showing that hatch and, you know, showing that load cover there as well. It doesn't show the split folding seat, but I guess that's another thing that's above that base model. I do think the Sierra at this time has a very high lip though, doesn't it, to lift things into there, which is surprising at this time where manufacturers are moving down to a much lower lip, but obviously that's there for strength. I do think again it does suit this attractive glacier blue, but of course metallic, so it would have been an extra cost option. One thing I did forget to mention, just move back there again, was the head restraints. You can see a different head restraint. These come as standard. Yes, the base model didn't have standard headrest, but even if you option it up for to have the headrests, it's still obvious that it's a base model headrest. They didn't even give you these nicer headrests, which again, a little bit weird. So if we just move back to the Cortina brush for a moment, this is what your end of life, or end of line I should say, Cortina L would have looked like in comparison. And yeah, it looks really nice, doesn't it, the L, but we have to take into account there is quite a few extras on this particular model. So if you look at these wheels, there would have been an optional extra wheel. They call them a sports wheel, although they're just a steel wheel, although nothing particularly special. But we've also got these overriders, which would have been an optional extra as well. And this is a tiny picture I've zoomed in, so it's not the best image, but you can see this one's got these sports lights on the front as well. Now, they would have all been extra and make for actually a really nice looking L spec Cortina, although this is the end of line Cortina, so you may well have got them thrown in at no extra cost. And we're really trying to get rid of the Cortina at the end. Anyway, let's move back to this Sierra and see what came after the L at the beginning. And pretty much what you're expecting, I'm sure everyone knew this would come next, the GL. The GL at the start of the Sierra production was actually always my favourite spec, even though it's not the top of the range one, and I'll kind of like explain that more when we get to the next model in the range. But there was only 4 models to choose from actually when the Sierra was launched. The L, Sorry, the base model, the L, the GL, and of course the gear, which we'll be looking at after this. So only a small range at the start really, but the GL was my favourite. And you can kind of like think of the GL and the gear being the high spec models, the L and the base being the lower spec models, and there's a few little differences because of that, which was very often in the case of Fords. But the GL was my favourite and would have been my pick at the start, and I'll kind of like I say, I'll talk more about that when we get to the gear. Anyway, let's read a bit more about the GL. So the GL is an executive class car. At this stage, the 2 litre and 2.3 litre engines become available. So straight into a nicer engine size, and some subtle design changes make the car more prestigious. The bumper colour is toned in with the body colour, and there is more bright work, notably around the windows and the dash. The upholstery is improved too. The GL has Chelsea cloth and a plusher carpet. There is also carpet on the rear package tray, and the carpet in the boot is colour coordinated. The driver's seat has an adjustable lumbar support, and back seat passengers get a folding centre armrest. Extras include a remote control driver's door mirror and more warning lights in the centre console. The horn is repositioned on the steering wheel, and the headlights are halogen. Now the main image now is a 2 litre GL 5-door champagne gold. Very much champagne gold, was very much a colour of its time, so I think it kind of like suits the car actually. Options fitted at extra cost here are the metallic paint of course, and this one's also got an automatic transmission apparently. Better engine choice now, we can get a 1600 or a 2 litre now, or even a 2.3 litre V6, so certainly moving up. It doesn't look like could we get a diesel? Yeah, we could get a 2.3 diesel as well, which is very nice. So much more choice on this particular model. So it says transmission wise, the 2.3 litre V6 comes standard with an auto, though you could get a 5-speed manual with that at no extra choice if you preferred. And it goes on to say the auto and 5-speed manual gearbox, optional extra on the 1.6 and 2 litre engines. Kind of like would expect at least a 2 litre to have the 5-speed, although you always find these early Fords, they really give you as little as possible, and the run-out models, like the run-out model of the Cortina, they always give you as much as possible, you find. Look at the differences with the wheels and tyres, lighting and electrical, and a few differences with the body. Like I said, I'm not going to read it all because the video is going to go way over time, but things like additional sound insulation for your GL. Interior upgrades of course, more luxury. I think it was a nice balance actually for the GL. I remember this is all the differences with that very base model, so it's not the differences between this and the L, which would make more sense, wouldn't it? But no, the differences between this and the base model, so there's going to be a lot because that base model really hardly add anything at all. And this of course is now becoming the more plusher, the more high line, if you will, models of this new Sierra. Anyway, what we'll do now is look at some of the images and look at some of the differences. We look inside this one and we'll notice this is an automatic. We can see just the 2-pedal layout there. It's not a huge difference, to be honest with you. I mean, we've still got, you know, keep fit windows even on the GL, which is surprising I guess, but we do have these extra sort of lights going down here. We've still got a pretty basic radio though, haven't we? So I wouldn't say it was exactly luxury, but it's just that sort of subtle differences really, isn't it? And like it said in the description, we've now got these horn buttons on the steering wheel, although the steering wheel is very similar to the L model. You notice with these higher spec ones, different looking door mirrors entirely, rather than that little bit of a spindly, unusual, weird actually door mirrors on the base model. We get these more conventional looking mirrors, and you know, there's a little bit of a lever to actually move them around. This particular one's showing how much space you've got in the hatch, but obviously that's the same as the L. Seats really do look a step up though, don't they? Particularly in the back there, and that nice centre armrest. Main image isn't the best, it's a bit of a funny angle, but like I say, that's that champagne gold. I think very much a colour of its time and really suited to the GL, and certainly reminds me of the GL when I see that particular colour. But we can see the front end's still the same with that sort of similar, more traditional looking front end compared to the gear, which we'll have a look at in a moment. But we've got those nicer mirrors on the doors. And that's your end of line Cortina GL, which again, even for the Cortina, was a nice spec actually. I mean, you had lovely seats. A move away, I guess wood's become a bit old fashioned now, so it didn't have that wood in the GL Sierra. Anyway, we must move on and have a look at the Sierra gear. And indeed, we move up to the top of the range model, the Sierra gear. So let's have a look at how it describes this model. So it tells us Sierra gear, the gear is the top of the Sierra range, and that means the top car in its class. The engine choice is up to you, though most gear drivers will no doubt prefer the 2.3 V6 apparently, so advising you to get the 2.3 V6 for your gear. From the front you can identify the gear immediately by its smooth nose. The air intake for the radiator is under the bumper. The front bumper incorporates moulding in overriders, and there's a deep front spoiler. Extra driving lights are built into the headlight unit, and front fog lights are standard as well. The door housings, or the door mirror housings I should say, are painted the same colour as the bodywork, and the mirrors themselves are electrically adjusted and heated to stop them misting up. And that is the look at the gear front end. That smooth nose, and like it says, there's sort of the air intake under the bumper now, so they move things around and change the front end entirely, as in the light setup, which was certainly unusual and certainly made the gear really stand out as a different thing, a more special Sierra. Personally, I didn't actually like the front end of the gear. I preferred the standard models, hence why I would have chosen the GL. But I think that's very much a personal thing. I'm sure a lot of people preferred the front end of the gear. Let me know in the comments which side of the game you're on. But for me personally, I thought it looked better with that grille in there. The wheel covers have 3 air vents instead of 2. So a different wheel trim, but we're not looking at alloy wheels on your gear. No, we'll just put an extra vent in the wheel trim, which is a little bit not very special. And there's a special gear rear light cluster on saloon models. Inside you'll find everything you expect of a gear and more. Both the driver's seat and the front passenger seat have adjustable lumbar supports. The driver's seat adjusts for height as well as rake and reach. And the back seats have adjustable headrests. The upholstery is comfortable material called Chatsworth fabric, and to complete the feeling of luxury, the doors have traditional wood cappings for gear crests. So there we go, there is a little bit of wood in there, I guess. If we move down, extra instruments include a rev counter and the graphic information module, which warns you of open doors, bulb failures and icy conditions. A clock with analog and digital displays is standard, or at extra cost you could specify the trip computer instead. The radio stereo cassette player has 4 speakers and power aerial, and central lock-in, a remote control tailgate release and electric front windows are all standard. So is the glass sunroof, which tilts or slides and has a sliding sun blind. There is an overhead console with 2 swiveling map lights. The courtesy lights stay on for a few seconds after you close the doors to give you time to make yourself comfortable. The passenger vanity mirror is illuminated. There is a reading light in the back, a light in the boot and another in the engine compartment. There is even a tiny torch built into the key so that you can find the door lock more easily on a dark night. And, oh yes, there's a tool kit in the boot. altogether the gear is quite a car. So the one it's showing you is a Gear 5-door in Strator Silver. It says options fitted at extra cost are metallic paint and tailgate wash wipe. So yes, even the topper range Gear didn't get tailgate wash wipe at launch, which is very strange, isn't it? You'd think all but maybe not the base model, but all the others would get that, because after all, hatchback, I always think it really needs it. So it's talked a lot about the specs in the write-up there, because they're really trying to promote you to say the Gear is the model to have. So we're not going to go through all of that, but we can see though we can still have a 1.6, a 2 litre, a 2.3 V6 petrol. Doesn't look like we can now get the diesel, because the diesels were always seen as being dirty diesels. We can't have that on our Gear, I guess. Transmission as the Sierra Saloon, but with automatic transmission standard on the 2.3 V6. We can get a 5-speed with it if we prefer, and automatic transmission and 5-speed manual gearbox options at extra cost on your 1.6 and 2 litre. It gives a nice little look at the Gear's tilt slide sunroof. A nice look at the rear, and then interesting rear lights. Head restraints even on the back, you'll notice, and indeed that wash wipe on this Gear model, but that was an optional extra. That wasn't a standard fit piece of equipment. We also get a side view, although it's not the best image because it is on the crease there, but you notice those different wheel trims. A reminder what our Cortina Gear looked like. I actually really like the Cortina Gear, so struggling with that one a little bit. I did like the Gear. Maybe I preferred the Gear Cortina a little bit with this more traditional grille on it, because like I say, I didn't particularly like the Gear Sierra front end, but that's very much a personal thing. But yeah, I did like the Cortina Gear as well. Now, the video is going longer than really what I would like it to, but a reminder, you can also get the Estates. You get the Estates as that very base model, just called the Sierra Estate. You can also get it as the L, the GL, and even the Gear, even right at launch there. Quick look at the rear. This is obviously the 1.6L, as you can see there. Very practical cars, and I did like the design of the Estate as well, I must admit. So this very interesting, very early Sierra brochure rather nicely also comes with the price guide, again dated October 1982, so it gives us a good idea of how much these Sierras were at launch, and we can compare it to the Cortina prices. So your very base model, the cheapest Sierra you could have got at launch was the 1300, not even an L, and that was priced at £4,782.85. I kind of feel with that model they was just trying to say you could get a Sierra for under £5,000, I'm going to say, and that range moved all the way up to the 2.3 litre Gear automatic at £8,567, and then of course you get the Estates, and they moved all the way up to the 2.3 Gear Estate Auto at £9,034 and change. So how did that kind of like fit in with the Cortina's price range? So as we zoom in on the Cortina prices, we can notice they've all been scribbled out because this brochure is very late. Actually, it's from August-September 82, so very late, just actually 1 month before the Sierra brochure, in fact. So they've been scribbled out because they would have been desperate to get rid of the last Cortinas by now. Of course, they really wanted to have the Sierra there on the forecourts. But we'll just forget that a moment and see these actual prices. So we can see the basic 1300, and we'll choose the 4-door, was £4,694. And just a reminder that the 1300 base Sierra was £4,782. So the Sierra was priced just right, really, wasn't it? It was very clever how they actually priced them. And if we go and have a look at the GL model, the 1.6 GL Cortina would have been £6,053. The 1600 GL Sierra, £6,179. So very closely matched prices, but No doubt you could get huge discounts if you still did want the Cortina. You know, you wasn't keen on this radical change in design for the Sierra. You could have got some good discounts and still walked away with a very nice Ford Cortina. So just bringing this brochure review to the end, we can certainly say the Sierra was a huge radical move away from the Cortina. You can imagine how it was shocked. You could imagine how Cortina owners would be a bit resistant of this brave new world, of this slippery Sierra. But I also say, as someone of 9 years old when these came out, I really liked them and I thought, wow, what an amazing looking car. So I guess it just depends your viewpoint, but no doubt it was brave of Ford to have such a huge move, because the Cortina was of course a well-loved car and, you know, a really good seller. You could also think about things like when the Escort was replaced with the Focus, but I think the difference there was the last Escorts weren't really very much loved. They were very bland cars, and the Focus was an absolutely fantastic car. So I guess that the difference was the Cortina was really loved right at the very end. So it took a while for buyers to actually warm to the Sierra, I think it's firm to say, but the sales speak for themselves. It did sell really well in the end. And on just one more final note, if we look at the Cortina, traditional design, and we forget the Sierra ever existed and just put up the Mondeo, you can almost forget that the Sierra ever existed. You can almost put a Cortina badge on the Mondeo, I sometimes think, and this was the natural evolution. Is that just me that can see that? But anyway, let me know in the notes, let me know in the comments what you think of all this. Thank you so much for watching today. It has gone a little bit longer than expected, this video, so if you're still watching, I do appreciate that very much. Hope you've enjoyed your Forward Friday. And of course, if you've not done it already, please do consider subscribing. It really does help the channel and helps you find the videos that you want to see. And if you click the little bell, it actually alerts you when there is a new episode. Like I say, thank you for watching. I've added a couple of extra boxes there. There are further videos if you want to continue viewing, and I always appreciate that. But for now, we'll say take care, have a lovely weekend, all the best, and goodbye.